Get out of my house! Now! Richard Whitmore's voice cut through the mansion like a blade. Danielle Brooks stood beneath a crystal chandelier, still gripping the brass key to the West Wing electrical room, while 20 dinner guests stared from behind champagne glasses. Richard, tall, white, silver-haired, and wrapped in a tuxedo worth more than Danielle made in a month, pointed toward the front door. And take your things with you. Danielle felt heat crawling up her neck. Behind Richard, the lights flickered once. Then twice. A faint electrical crackle whispered somewhere inside the wall. Nobody else seemed to notice. Danielle did. Sir, you need to keep the West Wing power off. Richard's jaw tightened. You are a maid. The words landed harder because of how quietly he said them. A few guests looked away. Others watched. I know what my job is, Danielle replied. Then do it. I was trying to keep this house safe. Richard gave a humorless smile. By shutting down half my mansion during a dinner with investors? His shoes clicked across the marble as he stepped closer. You clean rooms, Danielle. You do not diagnose electrical systems. She glanced toward the ceiling. The chandelier hummed with a thin metallic vibration. Something was wrong. She had smelled it 10 minutes earlier near the west staircase. Hot plastic, faint but unmistakable. Then she had pressed her palm against the paneled wall, and felt warmth pulsing beneath the wood. Her father had spent 30 years working industrial electrical jobs outside Baltimore. He had taught her one rule before she was old enough to drive. Heat, smell, sound. When electricity gives you all three, stop asking questions and cut the power. So Danielle had. And Richard had found her beside the breaker panel. Now her housekeeping bag sat at her feet like evidence of a crime. I am asking you one last time, she said. Do not restore that circuit. Richard looked past her toward Harold Pierce, his estate manager. Turn it back on. Danielle's stomach dropped. Mr. Whitmore. You heard me. Harold hesitated. Sir, perhaps we should call an electrician first. Richard's eyes hardened. Tonight? He gestured toward the dining room, where investors were waiting beneath dim chandeliers. Because she smelled something? Danielle saw it then, not doubt in his face, but certainty. He had already decided what she could know before she had finished speaking. Richard bent, picked up her bag, and carried it toward the entrance. The front doors opened. Cold rain hissed against the stone steps. He placed the bag outside. Your employment is terminated. Thunder rolled somewhere beyond the trees. Danielle slowly untied her white apron. No argument. No tears. She folded it once and placed it on the entry table. Then she looked at Richard. If you smell smoke, do not open the west wall. For the first time, his expression shifted. Barely. Good night, Danielle. The doors closed behind her with a heavy wooden boom. Rain struck her face as she walked down the long driveway, her shoes splashing through shallow water. Behind her, Whitmore Estate glowed gold against the storm, every window bright, every room warm. Danielle reached the iron gate and stopped beneath a dripping oak tree. A mechanical click echoed faintly from the mansion. Harold had restored the breaker. The west wing windows flashed alive. Danielle stared. 1 second. 2. 3. The upstairs lights flickered violently. Then a sharp blue pulse flashed behind the glass. The entire mansion went black. Danielle's breath caught. For half a heartbeat, there was nothing but rain. Then an alarm began screaming through the darkness. A child's silhouette appeared at an upstairs window. Danielle recognized the room instantly. Emily Whitmore's bedroom. She dropped her bag and ran. Behind the glass, another blue flash lit the second floor, and Danielle saw something that made her stop cold. The glow was not coming from the electrical panel. It was moving inside the wall. Danielle was already running before the second alarm began. Rain slapped against her face as she raced back toward the mansion, the black windows towering above her like empty eyes. Inside, emergency lights flickered weakly along the marble floor. Guests crowded near the foyer, their polished shoes scraping stone, voices colliding in the darkness. "Emily is upstairs!" Richard shouted. He turned and saw Danielle coming through the open door. For one stunned second, neither of them moved. "Where is she?" Danielle demanded. Richard pointed toward the west staircase. "Her bedroom." "Then nobody turns the power back on." Richard stared at her, soaked uniform clinging to her shoulders, rain dripping from her hair. 20 minutes earlier, he had treated her like she knew nothing. Now everyone in his mansion was looking at her for answers. A low vibration rolled through the wall. Danielle froze. Not a crackle this time. A hum. Deep. Mechanical. "What is that?" Harold whispered. Danielle moved toward the service corridor. The air grew warmer with every step. Near the garage entrance, amber emergency lights blinked above bare concrete. Somewhere beyond the wall, machinery shuddered to life, stopped, then started again. Danielle pressed 2 fingers against the painted surface and pulled them back. "Hot. The backup generator," she said. Richard appeared behind her. "It should be powering the house. It is trying to. Then why is everything dark?" Danielle looked toward the ceiling as another vibration passed through the beams. "Because something is forcing it offline." Richard's face tightened. "Can you fix it?" The question hung between them. Danielle slowly turned toward him. Minutes ago, he had told her she cleaned rooms. Now the billionaire was asking the maid to understand what his own estate manager could not. "I can tell you what not to do," she said. "Do not restart anything." Richard swallowed his pride. "Fine." A small voice echoed from upstairs. "Dad!" Richard spun toward the staircase. "Emily!" He rushed forward, but Danielle caught his sleeve. "Wait!" His eyes flashed. "That is my daughter. And that hallway is above the west wall. Move! Listen!" They both went still. Beneath the alarm came a faint popping sound, irregular and sharp, traveling behind the paneling toward the stairs. Richard's anger disappeared. "What is that?" "The reason I shut the circuit off." Danielle moved toward the service stairs instead. "There is another way to Emily's room." Harold shook his head. "The staff staircase ends behind the laundry room." "No. There is an old maintenance passage behind it." Richard stared at her. "How do you know that?" Danielle gave him one quick look. "Because I clean the rooms nobody in this house notices." That landed. Richard said nothing. They reached the lower garage corridor, where the generator coughed again. Fluorescent emergency strips flashed overhead, revealing expensive cars lined beneath the concrete ceiling. Danielle's wet shoes squeaked as she crossed toward a gray utility door. Richard followed, breathing hard. Behind them, the guests had gone silent. Danielle opened the door and felt a wave of heat. She stopped. On the far wall, 3 electrical cabinets stood beneath red indicator lights. 2 were dark. The third was blinking. Harold stepped closer. "That should not be active." Danielle's eyes narrowed. "What does it control?" "The West Wing auxiliary line." Richard looked from Harold to Danielle. "I thought you shut that off." "I did." Her voice dropped. "Someone turned it back on from here." Silence. Richard stared at the blinking light. "Who?" Before anyone answered, a metallic click came from the cabinet. Danielle saw the indicator change from red to green. Her stomach tightened. Someone was not just restarting the system. Someone was controlling it. Then Richard's phone lit up in his hand. A security notification filled the screen. The West Wing fire door had just been locked from the inside. And Emily was still behind it. "Nobody touches that cabinet." Danielle's voice cut through the garage before Richard could reach for the controls. The green indicator reflected across polished metal, blinking against his pale face while the backup generator trembled beneath the concrete floor. Upstairs, Emily was trapped behind a locked fire door. Richard looked at Danielle, then at Harold. "Override it." Danielle stepped between them. "If that line was remotely reactivated, forcing another reset could feed power straight into the fault." Richard's eyes hardened. My daughter is upstairs. That is exactly why you need to stop. Footsteps echoed behind them. Several guests had followed into the garage, expensive shoes striking concrete. One man raised his phone, camera already recording. Richard noticed. His shoulders stiffened. Put that away. The phone stayed up. Danielle wiped rainwater from her wrist and studied the electrical cabinets. Her father's voice returned from 20 years earlier, calm over the buzz of his workshop. Electricity leaves clues. She leaned closer without touching the panel. One indicator pulsed green every 4 seconds. Too precise. Too deliberate. This is not a malfunction, she said. Harold frowned. What? Something is commanding the auxiliary line. Richard exhaled sharply. You are guessing. Danielle looked at him. Then explain why a circuit I physically disconnected is active. Silence tightened the garage. The generator surged again, sending a vibration through the cars. Richard's phone chimed. Another security alert. West stairwell access denied. Emily! He turned toward the door. Danielle moved first. Service stairs. They ran. Her wet shoes hammered against concrete, Richard close behind. The emergency lights painted the corridor in weak amber bands. At the laundry room, Danielle shoved aside a rolling linen rack and reached behind a narrow wooden panel. Richard stared. What are you doing? She found an old brass latch and pulled. A hidden maintenance door opened into darkness. Richard's expression changed. How did you know? I told you. I know this house. Danielle switched on her phone flashlight. Dust floated through the white beam. The passage was barely 3 feet wide, lined with pipes and old wiring. Heat pressed against her face. Richard reached past her. I am going first. No, Danielle. You do not know where that passage comes out. His jaw flexed. Even now, with his daughter trapped, control was the one thing he could not release. This is my house. Danielle held his gaze. Then why am I the one who knows how to move through it? Richard went silent. Behind them, the guest's phone camera remained pointed their way. Danielle entered first. The passage amplified every sound, her breathing, Richard's footsteps, the distant alarm. Halfway up, she stopped so suddenly Richard nearly collided with her. A thin cable ran along the wall beside newer wiring. Danielle touched the outer insulation lightly. Cold. This cable was added recently. Richard aimed his flashlight at it. For what? She followed it upward. It disappeared through the wall toward Emily's floor. I do not know. A soft click came from above. Then another. Richard's phone chimed again. His face strained of color. The fire door just unlocked. Relief flashed across his eyes. Emily can get out. Danielle did not move. No, what? She stared at the cable. Nobody opened it. Richard looked at the notification again. Danielle's pulse accelerated. The system had locked Emily in, waited until they entered the maintenance passage, then released her door. That was not random. Someone knew where they were. They climbed faster. At the top, Danielle pushed open the service panel and emerged into the west hallway. Smoke hung near the ceiling, thin but growing. Emily! Richard shouted. A small figure appeared through the haze. Dad? Richard rushed forward and pulled his daughter close. For one breath, everything changed. His face collapsed with relief. Danielle almost smiled. Then Emily looked past her father. Where is Mr. Pierce? Danielle froze. Harold had been behind them downstairs. Why? Richard asked. Emily's voice trembled. He came into my room before dinner. The hallway seemed to lose all sound. He told me if the lights went out, I was not supposed to open the door for anyone. Richard stared at his daughter. Danielle slowly turned toward the maintenance passage. Harold was no longer behind them. Then every emergency light in the hallway switched off at once. Darkness swallowed the hallway before Richard could answer. Emily tightened both hands around her father's jacket. Somewhere behind the walls, a relay clicked once, then twice, followed by the low mechanical growl of the generator fighting to restart. "Nobody move," Danielle said. Richard's phone flashlight snapped on, cutting a white beam through the smoke. "We have my daughter. We are leaving. Not through the west staircase." Richard glared at her. "Stop telling me what I can do in my own house." Danielle heard it before she saw anything, a faint electrical buzz traveling above them. "Richard, listen. I have listened enough." "No. Actually, listen." The buzz grew louder, then stopped. Danielle aimed her light toward the ceiling. A thin line of smoke was curling from a ventilation grill directly above the staircase. Richard's expression changed. "That was not there before. Because the problem is moving." Danielle pulled open the maintenance panel. "Emily goes down first." Richard hesitated. Even now, surrendering control seemed physically painful. Then Emily whispered, "Dad, please." That broke him. He nodded. They entered the narrow passage, Richard keeping one arm around his daughter while Danielle led them downward. Metal pipes reflected their phone lights in cold silver streaks. Heat pressed through the walls. Halfway down, Danielle heard voices below. "Harold." And someone else. She raised one hand. Everyone stopped. "I told you to keep them upstairs," a muffled male voice said. Richard's breathing changed. "Who is that?" Danielle whispered. "Quiet." A door slammed below. Footsteps retreated across concrete. Richard pushed past her. "Pierce!" "Richard, wait!" He ignored her. They emerged into the garage to find Harold standing beside the electrical cabinets, his collar damp with sweat. The green indicator was still blinking. Several guests had gathered near the entrance, phones raised, their faces pale beneath the emergency lighting. "Where were you?" Richard demanded. Harold blinked. "Trying to stabilize the generator." Danielle looked at his hands. Clean. No tools. No gloves. Then she noticed something else. The auxiliary cabinet was open. "Who opened that?" Harold glanced toward it. "I did." "Why?" "Because unlike you, I know this system." A few guests murmured. Harold's eyes moved across Danielle's wet uniform, and his mouth tightened. "This has gone far enough. She shut down the house, panicked everyone, and now she is inventing some conspiracy." Richard looked at Danielle. For one terrible second, uncertainty returned to his face. Danielle felt every eye shift toward her. The same people who had watched Richard throw her into the rain were watching again. One phone camera moved closer. Harold pointed toward the panel. "The outage started after she touched the breakers." "That is not true," Danielle said. "You expect us to trust the maid over the estate manager?" Harold asked. Silence dropped hard. Danielle did not look away. "No. I expect you to look at the evidence." She stepped toward the cabinet. "The auxiliary line is active, but the generator is cycling every few seconds. That means something downstream is demanding power and rejecting it." Harold laughed once. "That does not even make sense." Danielle pointed toward the blinking indicator. "Then why does that light pulse exactly every 4 seconds? Nobody answered. 4 seconds passed. Green. 4 more. Green. Richard stared at it. Danielle followed the recently installed cable along the concrete wall until it disappeared behind a steel shelving unit. "Move that." Harold stepped in front of her. "Do not touch anything else." Richard's voice came low. "Move it." Harold turned. "Richard. Move the shelf." 2 guests helped slide it aside. Metal legs screamed against concrete. Behind it was a small black control box mounted where no control box belonged. A cable ran from it directly into the mansion's security network. The garage went silent except for the generator. Richard looked at Harold. "What is that?" Harold's face lost color. "I have never seen it." Danielle leaned closer. A tiny blue status light flashed. Then Richard's phone vibrated. His security application opened by itself. Door locks. Cameras. Fire controls. Every system began changing status one after another. One guest lowered his phone, suddenly frightened. Another whispered, "Someone has the whole house." Richard stared at the screen as his anger gave way to something Danielle had not seen in him before. Fear. Then Emily tugged Danielle's sleeve. "Miss Danielle?" Danielle crouched. "What is it, sweetheart?" Emily held out a tiny silver object she had been clutching since leaving her bedroom. "Mr. Pierce dropped this under my desk." Harold's eyes locked onto it. Danielle turned it over in her palm. It was a small electronic access key. Richard looked from the device to Harold. "Tell me she is lying." Harold said nothing. Then every garage door slammed shut at the same time, and the black control box began counting down from 60. 59 seconds, Danielle whispered. The number burned red across the black control box. 58. 57. Around her, the sealed garage vibrated with the uneven growl of the backup generator, while phone cameras kept recording and Richard's investors stared at him as if his mansion had become a trap. "Open those doors!" Richard shouted. Harold rushed to the wall controls. Nothing. "They are locked out." Richard grabbed his phone, but the security screen flashed access denied. His own house no longer recognized him. 48 seconds. "What happens at 0?" Emily asked. Nobody answered. Danielle studied the box, then the electrical cabinet, then the 4-second pulse she had noticed before. Green. Darkness. Green. "It is not counting down to an explosion," she said. Richard snapped toward her. "You do not know that." "No. But I know what the generator is doing." Harold stepped forward. "Stop pretending you are an engineer." The words cut through the garage. Several guests shifted uncomfortably, but Harold kept going. "She caused the first outage. She had access to the service corridors. Now she conveniently knows every hidden system in the house." Danielle felt the room turn toward her again. 39 seconds. Richard's face tightened. Fear and pride fought behind his eyes. "Danielle, give me the access key." She closed her fingers around the silver device Emily had found. "Not yet. That was not a request." Richard stepped closer. "My daughter is standing in a locked garage. And if this key is paired with that box, using it could trigger whatever comes next." "You are a housekeeper." His voice rose. "I am responsible for everyone in this building." Danielle's eyes stayed on his. "Then start acting responsible." Silence. Even the phones seemed suddenly louder. Richard's face flushed. 29 seconds. Harold reached for the key. Danielle pulled her hand back. "Do not. Give it to me." "Why are you so afraid of what is on it?" Harold froze. The generator coughed violently. Overhead lights flashed once, revealing sweat along Harold's temple. Danielle saw his eyes move toward the black box before the darkness returned. Not toward Emily. Not toward the doors. Toward the box. "You know what happens at 0, Danielle said. Richard turned slowly. "Harold? She is manipulating you." 21 seconds. "Answer him," Danielle said. Harold backed toward the cabinet. "Richard, think. You have known me 12 years. You have known her too." Danielle absorbed the sentence without blinking. There it was again. Status. Familiarity. A reason not to believe the woman in the uniform. Richard looked at Danielle, then Harold, then the investors filming every second of his hesitation. His empire had been built on making decisions faster than everyone else. Now he could barely breathe. 15 seconds. Emily suddenly spoke. "Dad?" Richard looked down. "Mr. Pierce told me not to open my door before the lights went out." Harold's face emptied. Emily pointed toward him. "He knew." The room changed. Phones lowered. One investor stepped away from Harold. Richard's voice cracked. "Tell me she misunderstood." Harold said nothing. 10 seconds. Danielle looked at the blinking cabinet and finally understood. 4-second pulse. Generator restart. Security reset. The countdown was synchronized with all three. "This is not about trapping us," she said. "It is about wiping something." Richard stared at her. "What?" Danielle looked toward the security rack. "The cameras." Harold moved. Richard blocked him. 5 seconds. Danielle inserted Emily's access key into the small control box. Harold shouted, "Do not!" Too late. The screen changed. The countdown stopped at 3. Then the garage monitors flickered alive one by one. Security footage filled every screen. Richard's guests turned toward them. A timestamp showed 40 minutes before dinner. Harold appeared on camera entering the West Electrical Room. He opened the auxiliary cabinet and installed the black control box himself. Richard stopped breathing. Another clip loaded automatically. Harold stood inside Richard's private office, photographing documents from an open safe. Then came a third recording. Harold was speaking to a man Danielle did not recognize. The audio crackled through the garage speakers. "Once Whitmore signs tonight, the transfer is irreversible." Richard's knees nearly gave beneath him. One hand found the hood of a car for support. His investors stared in stunned silence. The maid he had thrown into the rain had been right about everything. Danielle watched his face collapse as humiliation became realization. But then the final video appeared. Harold was standing outside Emily's bedroom. He looked directly into the security camera and said 4 words that turned Richard white. "If Danielle finds it, run." Danielle slowly looked toward Harold. His place beside the cabinet was empty. Behind them, the service door stood open. And from somewhere deep beneath the mansion came the unmistakable sound of another generator starting. The second generator started somewhere beneath the mansion, but Danielle did not move. Around her, the garage had gone unnaturally quiet. The first generator wound down with a tired metallic shudder, leaving only the soft hum of emergency power and Richard's uneven breathing. Harold was gone. The service door remained open. Cold white light stretched across the concrete, catching the edge of Danielle's wet uniform and the silver access key still resting in her palm. Every eye was on her now. Not with amusement. Not with suspicion. With waiting. Richard stared at the security monitors, where Harold's frozen image remained beside the words. "If Danielle finds it, run." His phone vibrated twice. Investors. Security. Probably lawyers. He ignored all of them. "What did he mean?" he asked. Danielle looked at the screen. "I do not know yet." Richard's voice dropped. "He knew your name." That was the part nobody could explain. Danielle had never spoken privately with Harold beyond housekeeping schedules and maintenance requests. Yet the man had installed a hidden control system, compromised the mansion, and somehow expected her to discover it. A slow mechanical vibration traveled through the floor. Danielle crouched and placed her fingertips against the concrete. Richard watched her. Hours earlier, that same gesture would have irritated him. Now he said nothing. "This generator is farther down," she murmured. "Below the garage." Harold had always insisted the lower utility level was sealed. Richard looked toward the service door. "There is no generator below us." Danielle raised her eyes. "Then what are we hearing?" Nobody answered. A guest phone camera lowered completely. Another investor quietly stepped toward Danielle instead of Richard. That tiny movement did not escape him. His jaw tightened, but this time the anger seemed aimed inward. Emily stood beside her father, wrapped in his tuxedo jacket. She looked at Danielle. "You came back for me." Danielle's face softened. "Of course I did." Emily glanced at the rain still shining on Danielle's sleeves. "Even after Dad made you leave?" Richard closed his eyes for half a second. The question landed harder than any accusation. Danielle did not rescue him from it. "Yes," she said quietly. Silence spread through the garage. Richard looked at the woman he had thrown outside, then at his daughter standing safely beside him because that woman had returned. Something in his posture gave way. Why? Danielle studied him. Emily did not throw me out. Nothing more. Richard lowered his gaze. Across the garage, nobody spoke. The power contrast that had filled the foyer earlier was gone. The billionaire stood surrounded by people who had watched him dismiss Danielle, while Danielle stood in a housekeeping uniform holding the only clue anyone trusted. Then Emily tugged gently at her hand. Miss Danielle, I think I know why Mr. Pierce knew you would find it. Danielle turned. Why? Emily reached into the pocket of Richard's jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He left this in my room. Richard stiffened. You had that the whole time? I was scared. Danielle unfolded it carefully. The paper smelled faintly of smoke. There was no message, only a hand-drawn diagram of the West Wing electrical system. 3 locations had been circled in red. The auxiliary cabinet, Emily's bedroom wall, and a third point beneath the garage. Danielle stared at the markings. Her breathing slowed. This is not Harold's handwriting. Richard leaned closer. How could you possibly know that? Danielle turned the page over. In the lower corner was a tiny symbol drawn in faded blue ink, a circle crossed by 3 short lines. Her fingers stopped. The garage disappeared around her for one silent second. She knew that mark. She had seen it on toolboxes, wiring diagrams, and handwritten repair notes throughout her childhood. Richard noticed the change in her face. Danielle? She swallowed. My father used this symbol. Richard stared at her. Your father? He marked every system he designed with it. The second generator suddenly stopped. Absolute silence followed. Then a single emergency light above the service door flickered on. Danielle looked again at the diagram. Beside the third red circle, nearly hidden beneath a fold, was a date. She rubbed her thumb across it. 12 years earlier. Richard's face went pale. That was the year I bought this estate. Danielle slowly looked up. Who renovated it? Richard did not answer immediately. He seemed afraid to. Finally, his voice came barely above a whisper. Harold managed the entire project. A soft electronic chime sounded from Richard's phone. One security camera had just come back online. Basement level. The image was grainy and almost black, but a figure stood beside the hidden generator. Richard enlarged the feed. Danielle stopped breathing. The man turned toward the camera. He was not Harold. And around his neck hung an old electrical contractor badge bearing a name Danielle had not seen since her father disappeared 12 years ago. Danielle stared at the contractor badge until the name became impossible to deny. Marcus Brooks. Her father. The garage seemed to shrink around her. Cold emergency light washed across Richard's face while the security monitor flickered, showing the older black man standing beside the hidden generator 12 feet beneath them. That is him, Danielle whispered. Richard looked at her. Your father disappeared 12 years ago? Danielle did not answer. She was watching Marcus raise one hand toward the camera. 3 fingers. Pause. 2 fingers. Pause. 1. Danielle's breath caught. He is not counting down. Richard stepped closer. Then what is he doing? Giving me the shutdown sequence. The investors turned toward her. Even the phones recording the scene became still. Danielle studied the generator indicators on the monitor. 3 lights. 2 relays. 1 manual isolation switch. It was the same pattern Marcus had taught her as a child when old equipment could not be trusted to shut down automatically. Richard shook his head. You cannot know that from hand signals. Danielle finally looked at him. You fired me because you thought I could not know anything. The words were quiet. Richard had no answer. A warning tone sounded. The black control box flashed system transfer pending. Harold's hidden network was trying to reconnect. How long? Richard asked. Danielle checked the pulse. Less than 2 minutes. Tell me what you need. The sentence changed the room. No command. No dismissal. Richard Whitmore was asking the woman he had thrown into the rain to lead. Danielle pointed toward the electrical cabinets. Kill the auxiliary feed when I say. Nobody touches anything before that. Richard turned to the guests. Do exactly what she says. An investor who had watched Danielle's humiliation in the foyer stepped beside the cabinet. Ready. Danielle looked back at the monitor. Marcus touched the first control below ground. The generator pitch dropped. Now. The investor pulled the disconnect. The garage lights vanished. Several people gasped. Only phone screens remained, floating like pale rectangles in the darkness. Then the emergency strips returned. One green indicator had gone dark. Second relay, Danielle whispered. Marcus moved on the monitor. A metallic thump traveled through the floor. The hidden control box began flashing faster. Harold's system was fighting back. Richard's phone vibrated continuously as doors unlocked, relocked, then unlocked again. Danielle. His voice was tight. Stay with me. I am here. She watched her father's hands. 2 fingers. Danielle pointed. Second disconnect. Now. Another switch dropped. The generator beneath them changed from a violent growl to a steady hum. Across the security monitors, camera feeds returned one after another. Foyer. West Hall. Kitchen. Driveway. Every compromised system was coming back under local control. Someone behind Danielle whispered. She did it. Danielle did not react. Not yet. On screen, Marcus reached for the final isolation lever. Then he stopped. His eyes moved towards something beyond the camera. Danielle leaned closer. Dad? Richard heard the word. So did everyone else. Marcus slowly lifted a folded document into view. He held it directly beneath the camera. Richard squinted at the screen. What is that? Danielle read the header. Whitmore Estate Electrical Renovation. Beneath it was Marcus Brooks's signature. And below that, another name. Harold Pierce. Richard's face strained. Danielle scanned the visible lines. Her father had documented unsafe modifications 12 years earlier and refused to certify them. Richard stared at the date. Harold told me the contractor abandoned the project. Danielle turned toward him. My father did not abandon it. The realization hit Richard publicly, brutally. Harold had lied about Marcus. The same man Richard trusted over Danielle had spent 12 years controlling the story. One by one, the investors lowered their phones. Their expressions toward Danielle were no longer skeptical. They were ashamed. Richard looked at her rain-soaked uniform, then at the apron still visible on a foyer camera where she had folded it after being fired. His voice barely came out. I judged you before I knew you. Danielle's eyes stayed on the monitor. We can talk about that later. Marcus finally pulled the last lever. Every alarm stopped. The garage fell into complete silence. Then the mansion lights returned, warm and steady, illuminating Danielle at the center of the room. Nobody moved. Richard looked around at his restored estate, then back at the woman he had called just a maid. You saved this house. Danielle shook her head. My father built the system that saved it. Suddenly Marcus pressed both palms against the camera and mouthed something. Danielle stepped closer. His expression was not relief. It was fear. She read his lips once. Then again. Her face changed. Richard whispered. What did he say? Danielle slowly turned toward the mansion above them. Harold was never trying to destroy the house. A phone chimed behind her. One of the investors looked at his screen and went pale. Every account connected to Whitmore Holdings had just been frozen. Danielle looked back at Richard. He was buying time to steal your company. He was buying time to steal your company. Danielle's words settled over the garage, and nobody spoke. The restored lights reflected off black cars and polished steel, but Richard Whitmore looked as if the ground beneath him had disappeared. His phone kept vibrating. Account frozen. Transfer suspended. Board authorization flagged. Around him, investors stared at their own screens as the scale of Harold's betrayal became clear. Richard slowly lowered his phone. 12 years? He whispered. I trusted him for 12 years. Danielle looked toward the monitor where Marcus Brooks still stood beside the hidden generator. And for 12 years, you believed what he told you about my father? Richard's eyes lifted to hers. There was no accusation in her voice. Somehow, that made it worse. A woman near the garage entrance lowered her phone camera. She had been one of the guests who watched Richard throw Danielle's bag into the rain. Now she could barely meet Danielle's eyes. Richard swallowed. What do we do? It was the second time he had asked instead of ordered. Danielle noticed. So did everyone else. Call your bank's fraud division. Lock every executive credential. Tell your board nobody approves anything until the security logs are preserved. Richard immediately handed instructions to one of his attorneys. No argument. No correction. The room moved because Danielle spoke. The irony hung there without anyone naming it. Less than an hour earlier, Richard had told her she cleaned rooms. Now lawyers, investors, and executives waited for her next sentence. A notification appeared on the central monitor. Transfer blocked. One investor released a breath. Another whispered, We stopped it. Danielle shook her head. My father stopped it 12 years ago. We just finally listened. Richard looked at Marcus on the screen. His face tightened with shame. Where is he? Danielle touched the monitor gently. Basement level. No. I mean, where has he been all these years? Marcus seemed to understand the question from Richard's expression. He lifted the renovation document again, then pointed toward a storage cabinet beside him. Danielle's pulse quickened. There is something down there. Richard stepped toward the service door. Danielle blocked him with one hand. He stopped instantly. That small obedience silenced the room. Police and fire crews first, she said. We do not know where Harold is. Richard nodded. Whatever you say. Danielle's eyes held his for a second. Do not say that because you are scared. Say it because you finally understand I might know something you do not. Richard's face fell. Several guests looked away. You are right. His voice was quiet. About tonight? Danielle asked. Richard shook his head. About me. The garage became still. Even the remaining phone cameras seemed intrusive now. Richard looked toward the foyer, where Danielle's folded apron remained on the entry table. When you warned me, I did not hear a person who might know more than I did. I saw a black woman in my housekeeper's uniform, standing where I thought she did not belong. Danielle's expression barely changed, but Emily's fingers tightened around hers. Richard continued, each word costing him something. I decided what you were capable of before I listened to you. Nobody interrupted. And I was wrong. One investor slowly lowered his head. Another put his phone away. The same room that had watched Danielle's humiliation now witnessed Richard name the prejudice behind it without hiding behind anger or status. He turned toward the guests. She warned us. I humiliated her. I fired her. And when my daughter needed help, Danielle came back anyway. His voice cracked on the last words. Emily stepped away from her father and wrapped both arms around Danielle's waist. Danielle closed her eyes for one brief second, then rested a hand against the child's hair. Richard watched them, unable to speak. I want to make this right, he finally said. You cannot make it right with a check, Danielle replied. Or a job title. Richard nodded slowly. Then tell me how. Danielle looked around the garage at the staff members standing behind the investors, people who had spent years moving quietly through Richard's mansion. Start by learning their names. Richard followed her gaze. For the first time that night, he seemed to actually see them. Then a heavy metallic door opened on the basement security feed. Marcus stepped through it carrying a weathered toolbox and a thick envelope. Danielle moved closer to the monitor. Written across the envelope in faded ink were two words, for Danielle. Her composure finally cracked. Dad? Marcus looked directly into the camera, tears bright beneath the cold basement light. Then he held up one finger and pointed toward the garage elevator. A soft chime sounded behind Danielle. Everyone turned. The elevator indicator began climbing from the basement. Richard stepped back. Emily held Danielle's hand. Nobody spoke as the numbers rose. 1, 2. Garage. The doors opened slowly. Danielle stopped breathing. The elevator doors opened, and Danielle forgot every person watching her. Marcus Brooks stood beneath the cold fluorescent light, older than the father she remembered, his shoulders thinner, gray threaded through his beard. In one hand was the weather toolbox she had seen beside him throughout childhood. In the other was the envelope bearing her name. For several seconds, Danielle could not move. Neither could Marcus. The generators had fallen silent now. Heat lifted faintly from cooling metal, and somewhere behind the crowd, a phone camera slowly lowered. "Dad?" Danielle's voice was barely there. Marcus stepped forward. "Hey, baby girl." That was all it took. Danielle crossed the concrete floor and wrapped her arms around him. The woman who had stayed composed through alarms, accusations, smoke, and humiliation finally closed her eyes against her father's shoulder. Marcus held her without speaking. No one in the garage dared interrupt. Richard stood several feet away with Emily beside him, watching the reunion inside the mansion he had believed belonged entirely to him. Marcus eventually pulled back and touched Danielle's cheek. "You remembered the sequence." A tear escaped before she could stop it. "You taught me." Marcus smiled. "I was hoping you would never need it." He handed her the envelope. Inside were copies of inspection reports, photographs, and letters documenting the unsafe modifications Harold had ordered years earlier. Marcus had refused to approve them. Harold retaliated by destroying his reputation, burying the reports, and making it appear that Marcus had abandoned the project after taking money. Marcus had spent years trying to prove what happened, working quietly outside the state, while preserving the original evidence. Richard stared at the documents. "I never saw any of this." Marcus met his eyes. "You never asked me?" Richard flinched. The sentence was not angry. It did not need to be. Police lights began washing softly across the driveway outside, blue and red reflections moving over the garage walls. One of Richard's attorneys approached and quietly confirmed that Harold had been located near the estate's service exit. The financial transfer remained blocked. The evidence was secured. For the first time all night, there was nothing left for Richard to control. He looked at Danielle. Her wet housekeeping uniform had begun to dry beneath the warm lights. "I owe your family more than an apology." Marcus glanced at his daughter, but Danielle answered. "An apology is where you start." Richard nodded. "Then I am sorry." He looked at Marcus. "To both of you." Then he turned toward the employees gathered near the garage entrance. "And to everyone here who learned they had to become invisible to work in my home." Nobody applauded. Nobody needed to. Richard walked to the foyer himself, picked up Danielle's folded apron from the entry table, and returned with it resting across both hands. He did not offer it back as though returning her job was some great reward. He simply held it out. "This belongs to you." Danielle looked at the apron for a long moment. Then she took it, folded it once more, and placed it gently on top of her housekeeping bag. She did not put it on. Richard understood. Weeks later, morning light poured through the restored West Wing windows. The damaged wiring was gone. Independent inspectors had signed off on every circuit. Marcus Brooks's original safety reports had been formally entered into the estate records under his own name. In the main hallway, Richard walked past two housekeepers discussing a maintenance problem. He stopped. "Maria. Kevin." Both employees looked surprised that he knew their names. Richard listened until they finished. Then he thanked them. Across the hall, Danielle saw it happen. She said nothing. She was no longer working as a maid at Whitmore Estate. Richard had offered her a management position, but she had declined that too. Instead, with her father beside her, she had enrolled in an electrical engineering program and begun working toward the career she once thought life had closed off. Before leaving the mansion that morning, Danielle walked through the foyer one final time. Richard stood near the front doors, the same doors he had slammed behind her in the rain. Danielle! She turned. He seemed to search for something worthy of the moment, then abandoned the effort. Thank you for coming back. Danielle looked toward Emily, safe and smiling beside the staircase. Then she looked at Richard. I came back for her. A small smile touched his face. I know. Richard opened the door for Danielle and Marcus. Outside, the storm was gone. Sunlight stretched across the wet stone steps, turning every remaining drop of rain gold. Danielle stepped through without looking back. Richard remained inside, one hand resting quietly on the open door. Above him, the chandelier glowed warm and steady. This time, when Danielle walked away from Whitmore Estate, nobody threw her out. They stood in silence and watched her leave on her own terms.